Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. June of 2018 was when everything changed for me, when my faith in the badge and the uniform got tested in ways they never prepare you for at the academy. 26 and already 4 years into highway patrol, I thought I'd seen enough late-night wrecks and DUIs to last a lifetime working the graveyard shift on State Route 47. Most nights consisted of speeding tickets, the occasional drunk driver, maybe helping someone with a flat tire on that long stretch of nothing between Millbrook and Canton. My sergeant used to joke that the most dangerous part of our job was staying awake through those endless dark hours when the radio stayed quiet and the road stretched empty for miles. But that particular Thursday night in June taught me that sometimes the quiet is when you need to be most alert, when predators count on your routine and isolation to spring their trap. Dispatch came through at 2:47 a.m., cutting through the dead silence in my patrol car like a knife. Single vehicle accident, possible rollover. Caller reported someone pinned and bleeding badly on Old Quarry Road about 8 miles past the county line. I knew that stretch well. A narrow 2-lane that curved through dense pine forest with no streetlights, no houses, just an abandoned limestone quarry that shut down in the 90s. The dispatcher, Nancy, sounded frustrated as she relayed the information, said the call dropped after maybe 20 seconds and she couldn't get the person back on the line. Cell service out there was spotty at best, dead zones everywhere between the hills. Protocol said wait for backup on remote calls, but when someone's bleeding out, every second matters. I flipped on my lights and pushed the Crown Vic hard through those winding curves, telling Nancy I'd assess the scene first while she tried to route an ambulance from the county hospital. Old Quarry Road appeared in my headlights like a tunnel carved through solid darkness, the pine trees creating walls on both sides that seemed to swallow the light. I kept my spotlight sweeping left and right, looking for any sign of a vehicle off the road or debris that might indicate where someone went over. After about 3 miles in, I spotted it. Fresh tire marks veering hard right, straight through the soft shoulder and into the tree line. My spotlight caught the gleam of metal maybe 30 feet down the embankment. A silver sedan wrapped around a massive oak tree, the driver's side completely crushed. Steam still rose from under the crumpled hood, and I could see dark stains on the shattered windshield that made my gut tighten. I grabbed my flashlight and medical kit, radioing my position to Nancy while I half slid down the muddy slope, my boots struggling for purchase on the wet leaves. When I reached the vehicle, a 2012 Toyota Camry according to the twisted remnants of the trunk badge, the smell hit me first. Copper and gasoline mixed with pine sap and damp earth. Blood covered the driver's seat, pooled on the floor, splattered across the dashboard in a pattern that seemed wrong somehow. Too deliberate, like someone had thrown it rather than bled it. No body though, no victim trapped behind the wheel or thrown through the windshield. I circled the car with my flashlight, checking the back seat, the surrounding brush, calling out for anyone who might have crawled away injured. That's when I noticed the phone, an old iPhone propped carefully on the passenger seat, screen glowing with an active call. A woman's voice played on speaker, desperate and looping. "Please help me, oh God, please, he's coming back, I can hear him. Please somebody help me." The recording repeated every few seconds the same terrified plea, and I realized with a cold certainty that this wasn't a voicemail or a pocket dial. Someone had recorded this and left it playing. I reached for my radio, keeping my other hand on my service weapon as an instinct I couldn't quite explain kicked in. "Nancy, we've got a situation here. This doesn't look right. Possible false report. Requesting immediate backup to my location." Static crackled back at me, then Nancy's voice choppy and breaking up. "Unit 47, say again, you're breaking up. Did you find the victim?" I tried adjusting the radio, moving away from the car to get better reception, but the static only got worse. My GPS unit on the dashboard started flickering, the location jumping around before going dark entirely. Training told me to get back to my vehicle, establish communication, wait for backup, But then I saw headlights crest the ridge about half a mile behind where I'd parked. Not the emergency lights of an ambulance or another patrol car, just regular headlights, moving slow and deliberate down the road toward my position. The headlights stopped about 200 yards from my patrol car, sitting there in the darkness, engine running. I could hear it idling, a diesel sound, heavy like a truck or a large SUV. My radio crackled again and Nancy's voice came through clearer this time. All units, we have a second 911 call reporting shots fired on Old Quarry Road. Caller says an officer is down, requesting all available units respond code 3. My blood turned to ice because I hadn't heard any shots, hadn't reported being fired upon, and I was the only officer on this road. Someone was calling in false reports, trying to flood the scene with responders, or maybe trying to confuse dispatch about what was really happening. I keyed my radio. Nancy, this is Unit 47. I'm code 4. No shots fired. This is a setup. Tell responding units to approach with extreme caution. But when I released the button, I only heard that same static, like something was jamming the frequency. Movement in my peripheral vision made me spin toward the tree line on the opposite side of the road from the wrecked car. 3 figures emerged from the woods, walking steady and purposeful toward my position, spread out in what we called a tactical formation at the academy. They wore dark clothing, faces obscured by baseball caps and bandanas, and I could see the outline of long guns in their hands. My training kicked in hard. Multiple hostiles, superior firepower, compromised communications, isolated location. This wasn't random. They'd studied our response protocols, knew a lone officer would respond to a bleeding victim call, knew the dead zones where radios failed, knew exactly how long it would take backup to arrive even with a shots-fired call. I moved behind the patrol car's engine block, drawing my Glock 22, knowing 15 rounds wouldn't mean much against 3 rifles, but having no other option. A 4th figure appeared near the vehicle that had stopped up the road, talking into what looked like a handheld radio or phone. The 3 approaching gunmen stopped about 50 yards out, taking positions behind trees, and I heard one of them laugh, a sound that carried clear in the still night air. They weren't rushing, weren't shouting commands, just waiting, and that patience terrified me more than aggression would have. These weren't meth heads or desperate criminals making impulsive decisions. This was calculated, rehearsed, professional. The recording on the phone in the crashed car kept playing its loop, that woman's voice begging for help, and I understood now it was meant to keep me here, to make me hesitate about leaving a potential victim. Every detail had been planned. The blood to make it look real, the phone to sell the emergency, the GPS jammer to prevent tracking, the false 911 calls to confuse response. They'd turned our own procedures into a weapon against us. The smart play was getting back in my patrol car and ramming through whatever they'd set up, but I knew they'd anticipated that too. Sure enough, when I glanced toward my vehicle, I saw liquid spreading under it, pooling dark and reflective in the moonlight. They'd punctured my fuel tank while I was down at the crashed car, probably with a suppressed rifle shot I hadn't even heard. The Crown Vic might make it a mile, maybe 2 before dying, and then I'd be on foot with armed pursuers who knew this terrain. My vest would stop pistol rounds but not rifle fire, and they had all the advantages: numbers, firepower, preparation, position. I needed to buy time, needed backup to actually receive those false reports and come running, needed to survive the next few minutes until help arrived. The 4th figure by the truck raised something to his shoulder, and I saw the distinctive profile of a scoped rifle. Instead of taking the shot they expected, I did something that probably saved my life. I grabbed the phone from the crashed car and hurled it as far as I could into the woods opposite from the gunman, then immediately sprinted toward the steep embankment that led down to the Old Quarry access road. The recorded voice sailed through the air, still pleading for help, and I heard shouting behind me, confusion as they tried to track both the phone and my movement in the darkness. Branches tore at my uniform as I half fell, half controlled my descent down the 40-foot slope, using trees to slow my momentum, my duty belt catching on roots and rocks. A rifle cracked above me and bark exploded from a pine tree inches from my head. Then another shot sparked off a boulder to my left. They were shooting at sound and movement, not clear targets, which meant their night vision wasn't perfect. I reached the bottom and found the old gravel service road that connected to the quarry, oriented myself, and started running hard toward the main highway 3 miles away, my boots pounding on the loose stones. Behind me, I could hear them crashing through the underbrush, coordinated pursuit with one group following my path, while another probably circled around to cut me off at the highway. My radio suddenly burst to life with clear signal. Nancy's voice urgent. "Unit 47, what's your status? We have multiple units 5 minutes out." I keyed the mic while running, breath coming in gasps. "Code 3, officers need help. 4 armed suspects, rifles, ambush scenario. Approaching Highway 12 from the quarry road on foot." The next 2 miles were the longest of my life, running in full gear, vest and duty belt weighing me down, listening for vehicles or footsteps behind me. I heard engines in the distance getting closer, and couldn't tell if it was the suspects or backup. When I finally burst out of the tree line onto Highway 12, 5 patrol cars were screaming toward me, lights painting the forest red and blue. I waved them down, pointing back toward the quarry road, and collapsed against the first unit that stopped, legs shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. The aftermath revealed just how sophisticated the operation was. The crashed car was stolen 3 states over, the blood was pig's blood from a slaughterhouse, and the phone had been programmed to call 911 through a spoofed cell tower they'd set up in a van. Investigators found the same group had hit 2 other officers in neighboring states using similar tactics, one in Missouri who wasn't as lucky as me and took a round through his shoulder before backup arrived. They tracked the crew through the burner phones they'd used, tracing them to a militia group that specifically targeted law enforcement, studying our protocols through leaked training materials and emergency response recordings they'd obtained through FOIA requests. All 4 were arrested 2 weeks later during a raid on a compound in Arkansas, and they found maps of rural patrol routes, radio frequencies, and detailed notes on response times for dozens of jurisdictions. I still work highway patrol, but now on day shift in a more populated district, and I never respond to remote calls alone, no matter what the emergency sounds like. That woman's recorded voice still visits my dreams sometimes, pleading for help that was never real, a ghost created specifically to draw me into their crosshairs. "7 months have passed since that night, and I still avoid Interstate 24 whenever possible. People ask me why I quit trucking after 15 years on the road, why I sold my rig and took a desk job that pays half what I used to make. I tell them I got tired of the lifestyle, that my back couldn't handle those long hauls anymore, but the truth sits heavy in my chest like a stone I can't digest. I need to share what I saw, what I reported, what they found because of my call. Maybe putting it out here will help me sleep, without seeing those faces pressed against the glass, without hearing those sounds that weren't supposed to exist at a rest area 40 miles from nowhere." I'd been driving the Nashville to Memphis route for about 3 years by then, usually making 2 or 3 runs a week, hauling auto parts for a distribution center. That particular Monday in early October started like any other. I loaded up around noon and figured I'd push through to Memphis before stopping for my mandatory rest period. But my coffee thermos ran dry somewhere past mile marker 85, and my eyelids started getting heavy, so I decided to pull into the old rest area near the county line. Most truckers avoided that spot because the facilities were run down and the parking lot lights barely worked, but it was quiet and I just needed a few hours of sleep before continuing on. The parking lot had maybe 4 other trucks scattered around when I pulled in, which wasn't unusual for that time of evening. I parked near the edge where the trees gave some shade during the day, killed the engine, and climbed into my sleeper cab. I'd just gotten comfortable when I heard what sounded like someone yelling, but it was muffled and distant, like it was coming from behind the main building. At first I figured it was just drivers arguing over something stupid. Maybe someone had blocked someone else in, so I ignored it and tried to settle back down. But then I heard it again, higher pitched this time. almost like a woman screaming, and my whole body went rigid because there shouldn't have been any women at that rest area at 2 in the morning. I sat up and looked through my windshield toward the main building, a long concrete structure that housed the bathrooms and some old vending machines that hadn't worked in years. Behind it, barely visible in the darkness, I could make out what looked like a newer addition, a metal building with a couple of floodlights aimed at a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." As I watched, that door opened and 2 men walked out, one in what looked like a uniform, maybe private security, and they were half carrying, half dragging someone between them. The person's head was down, their feet barely touching the ground, and even from that distance I could tell something was very wrong with how they were moving, like they couldn't support their own weight. They loaded the person into the back of a white van that I hadn't noticed before, parked right up against the building. One of the men slammed the door shut while the other walked around to the driver's side, and that's when I saw the logo on his shirt catch the light. Roadside Protection Services, with some kind of badge design underneath. The van pulled away, not toward the highway but down a service road that ran deeper into the woods behind the rest area. I grabbed my phone to call 911, but then I stopped because what would I even say? That I saw security guards putting someone in a van? They'd probably tell me it was none of my business. Maybe someone got sick or hurt and they were taking them for help. But I couldn't ignore what I'd heard. Those screams that didn't sound like someone who was hurt. They sounded like someone who was terrified. I decided to take a walk just to stretch my legs, I told myself. Maybe wander over toward that building and see if anything else seemed out of place. I grabbed my flashlight, one of those heavy metal ones that doubles as a weapon if you need it to, and stepped out of my cab. The October air hit me like ice water, way colder than it should have been for that time of year, and I could smell something chemical in the air, like bleach mixed with something else I couldn't identify. The other trucks in the lot were all dark, their drivers probably asleep, and I felt completely alone as I started walking toward the main building. I circled around the side of the restroom building, staying in the shadows as much as possible, my heart hammering so loud I was sure anyone nearby could hear it. The closer I got to that metal addition, the stronger that chemical smell became, and now I could hear other sounds, a low humming like industrial fans running, and underneath that, voices. Multiple voices, some talking, some crying, some just making these low moaning sounds that made my stomach turn. There was a window on the side of the building, covered with some kind of reflective film, but there was a corner where it had peeled away. I crept up to it, keeping my flashlight off, and pressed my eye to that small gap. What I saw in that room will haunt me until the day I die. There were mattresses on the floor, maybe 8 or 9 of them, each with a person curled up on it. Most were women. Young women, though. I spotted at least 2 who couldn't have been older than 16. Their wrists were zip-tied to metal rings bolted into the wall, giving them just enough slack to lie down but not enough to reach the door. Some were dressed in regular clothes that were torn and dirty. Others wore these cheap-looking robes that barely covered them. One girl near the window was awake, staring at nothing with eyes that looked completely empty, like she'd given up hoping anyone would find her. A man in that same Roadside Protection Services uniform sat in a chair by the door, scrolling through his phone like he was just pulling a regular security shift, like those weren't human beings chained to the walls around him. I backed away from that window, my legs shaking so bad I nearly fell. I needed to get back to my truck, call 911, call the FBI, call anybody who would listen. But as I turned to leave, a hand grabbed my shoulder and spun me around. Another security guard, this one bigger, with a scar that ran from his ear to the corner of his mouth. He looked at me for a long moment, then smiled this cold smile and said, "You lost, driver?" I mumbled something about looking for the bathroom, but he wasn't buying it. His hand moved to his belt where I could see a gun holstered, and he said, "Bathrooms in the main building. This area's restricted. Company property." I nodded, started to walk away, and that's when I saw it. A state patrol car parked behind the building, partially hidden by a dumpster. The engine was running, but the lights were off. The guard must have seen me notice the patrol car because his whole demeanor changed. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell cigarettes and something sour on his breath, and said, "You didn't see nothing tonight, understand? You're gonna walk back to your truck, you're gonna drive away, and you're gonna forget this rest stop exists. Otherwise, well, truckers go missing all the time. Dangerous highways, especially for drivers who stick their nose where it doesn't belong." He patted the gun on his hip to make sure I got the message. I nodded again, turned around, and forced myself to walk, not run, back to my truck. My whole body was screaming at me to sprint, but I knew he was watching. Probably had others watching too. When I finally made it to my cab, I locked the doors, started the engine, and pulled out of that rest area as calm as I could manage, even though every instinct told me to floor it. I drove for about 5 miles before I pulled over at a gas station that was bright and busy, full of normal people doing normal things. My fingers were shaking so bad it took 3 tries to dial 911. The dispatcher who answered sounded bored at first, probably used to getting calls about fender benders and speeding complaints. But when I started describing what I'd seen, her voice changed completely. She kept me on the line, transferred me to someone else, then someone else again. Within 10 minutes, I was talking to an FBI agent who told me to stay exactly where I was, that they were sending someone to meet me immediately. 2 agents showed up within the hour, and I told them everything: the room, the girls, the security company, and most importantly, that state patrol car hidden behind the building. What happened next was all over the news for weeks, though they kept my name out of it, thank God. They raided that rest area just before dawn with a joint task force of FBI and state police from a different district, not local. They found 14 women and girls, the youngest just 15, all victims of trafficking. The Roadside Protection Services was a shell company that had somehow gotten a legitimate contract with the state to provide security for several rest areas along the interstate. They'd been using that cover to run their operation for almost 4 years. The real kicker came when they arrested everyone involved. Among them were 2 local cops who'd been using their patrol cars to transport victims and provide cover when needed. One of them was a sergeant with 18 years on the force, a family man with 3 kids who'd been living a complete double life. I testified before a grand jury 3 months later, behind a screen so the defendants couldn't see my face. All of them got convicted. The 2 cops got 25 to life, the security guards got similar sentences, and they tracked down 3 more people who were running the money side of things. The victims, the ones who survived, were given counseling and help starting over, though I doubt any amount of therapy erases what they went through. As for me, I couldn't drive truck anymore. Every rest stop looked sinister. Every security guard made me nervous, and I kept wondering how many other places like that are operating right now, hidden in plain sight. I work in a warehouse now, home every night, and I never take the interstate if I can avoid it. People think I'm paranoid when I tell them to be careful at rest stops, to never get out alone at night. But I know what's out there. I know that sometimes the people meant to protect us are the very ones doing the harm, and that knowledge changed something fundamental in how I see the world. Mile marker 142 on Highway 65 is where everything changed for me. I'd passed that same green sign probably 1,000 times during my years with Tennessee Highway Patrol, never thinking it would become a landmark I'd never forget. That Wednesday afternoon, traffic was light, just the usual mix of semis and commuters heading north toward Kentucky. 23 years wearing the badge teaches you to read vehicles like other people read faces, and that beat-up Corolla maintaining exactly 55 in the right lane was trying too hard to be nobody. Perfect speed, perfect lane position, like someone had coached the driver on how to be invisible. The spider web crack spreading across the left taillight gave me legal cause to make the stop. The driver pulled over with mechanical precision, positioning the car so perfectly parallel to the shoulder line it seemed practiced. Through my windshield, I watched him arrange both hands at 10 and 2 before I even stepped out of my cruiser. That kind of rehearsed compliance always makes me pay closer attention. I ran the plates while walking up, registered to a Paul Brennan from Cookville, clean record, nothing remarkable. But when I reached his window and he rolled it down, the smell hit me immediately. Multiple air fresheners fighting each other, creating a chemical cloud that made my eyes water. His forehead gleamed with perspiration despite the 40-degree weather, and when he passed me his license, his fingers trembled enough to make the plastic card flutter like a moth wing. Paul Brennan matched his photo, but nothing else about him matched a normal traffic stop. He answered my questions about where he was headed with single words, Memphis, while his eyes kept flicking to his rearview mirror. Not checking for traffic, but checking his trunk area through the back window. Quick glances, then back to me, then to the trunk again. His breathing came in these controlled little bursts, like someone counting between inhales. I asked him to step out of the vehicle, and he complied so fast he nearly fell getting out. Standing there beside his car, he kept shifting his weight, rocking slightly, his hands opening and closing at his sides. The temperature was dropping as the sun set behind us, but fresh sweat kept beading on his upper lip. I asked him about the air fresheners, keeping my tone conversational, just curious why he needed so many. He stuttered through an explanation about buying the car used, said it had a smell he couldn't get out, something about spilled milk in the summer. But his voice cracked on the word summer, and he immediately looked at the trunk again. That's when I heard it, or thought I did. A soft thump from the rear of the vehicle. Could have been the exhaust cooling, could have been the wind hitting the car just right. Brennan heard it too because his whole body went rigid. He started talking faster, saying he really needed to get to Memphis, had a job interview in the morning, couldn't be late. The words tumbled out while his feet stayed planted like they were glued to the asphalt. I told him I needed to check his vehicle, standard procedure for the taillight violation, make sure everything else was in working order. His face changed then, went from nervous to something else, something desperate. He asked if I had to, said he'd fix the taillight as soon as he got to Memphis, promised to get it done first thing. When I insisted, he took a step backward, just one step, but enough to make me adjust my stance. His keys were still in the ignition, engine running, and I could see him calculating distances. I've seen that look before, guys deciding whether to run or fight or comply. I kept my voice steady, told him this would just take a minute, asked him to pop the trunk. He said the latch was broken, said he'd been meaning to fix it, said a lot of things that didn't explain why his whole body was shaking now. I walked around to the trunk myself, Brennan trailing behind me, still talking about Memphis and interviews and broken latches. The trunk had scratches around the lock, fresh ones that gleamed silver against the faded paint. When I pressed the release button inside the car, nothing happened. Brennan said, "See, told you broken," but his voice had gone high and thin. I got my flashlight and crouched down, looking at the latch mechanism, and that's when I heard it clearly. Not a thump this time, but movement, deliberate movement, and what sounded like breathing that wasn't coming from Brennan or me. I stood up and looked him in the eye, told him to open the trunk right now. He shook his head, said he couldn't. Said, "Please, officer, just let me go. I'll throw away the taillight. I'll never drive through Tennessee again." I called for backup then, keeping my eyes on Brennan while I spoke into my radio. His shoulders sagged when he heard me give our location, and he sat down right there on the cold asphalt, put his head in his hands. Started saying he didn't know, they just paid him to drive, $500 to take the car to Memphis and leave it at a rest stop. Said he never looked, never asked questions, just needed the money. While we waited for backup, I kept hearing those sounds from the trunk, stronger now, rhythmic tapping like someone trying to signal. I told Brennan we were opening that trunk one way or another, and he just nodded, defeated. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a second key, one that wasn't on his main ring. Said they gave him this one separately, told him to never use it unless instructed. His hand shook so bad when he held it out that I had to take it from him. The key turned smooth in the lock, and the trunk popped open with a soft click. The smell hit first, human sweat and fear and something chemical, like chlorine. She was curled in the fetal position, a girl maybe 16 or 17, duct tape around her wrists and ankles, another piece hanging loose from her mouth where she'd managed to work it free. Her eyes were huge, blinking in the sudden light, and she made this sound, half sob, half gasp. I reached for her and she flinched back, pressing herself against the wheel well. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, and when she tried to speak, only a rasp came out. I told her she was safe now, kept repeating it while I cut the tape with my knife, but she kept staring past me at Brennan, who was crying now, saying over and over that he didn't know she was so young, didn't know anything except where to drive. Backup arrived in minutes, 2 more patrol cars and an ambulance that I'd requested the moment I saw her. The paramedics wrapped her in blankets, gave her water in small sips while checking her vitals. She'd been in that trunk for at least 8 hours, according to what she managed to whisper. Grabbed from a mall parking lot in Kentucky, she remembered a white van, then waking up in darkness hearing road noise. They'd moved her twice before Brennan's car, she said. Different vehicles each time, always at rest stops. While the EMTs worked on her, Brennan started talking to anyone who would listen. Names of rest stops, times he was supposed to arrive, a phone number that called him with instructions. He swore he thought he was moving drugs, said they told him it was pills, that the weird sounds were just the packages shifting. But his story kept changing, and we all knew he was lying about what he knew. The girl, Haley was her name, told us about hearing other voices when they transferred her. Not just one person, but several, speaking in code words about packages and delivery times. She'd memorized some of what she heard through the tape over her mouth, kept repeating it to herself to stay focused, to stay sane. Routes they mentioned, something about a warehouse near Louisville, regular runs every few days. The detectives who arrived started mapping it out while Haley was still in the ambulance. This wasn't random, wasn't opportunistic. This was organized, methodical, using people like Brennan who needed quick cash and wouldn't ask questions. The broken taillight hadn't even been accidental. Haley heard them talking about keeping speeds perfect, never giving cops a reason to stop them. But they couldn't control everything. Couldn't fix that crack that spread just enough to catch my eye at mile marker 142. What Brennan gave us that night opened everything up like pulling a thread on a cheap sweater. The phone number led to a burner, but the tower pings showed patterns, regular stops at specific locations across 3 states. Within a week, FBI got involved, found the warehouse Haley had heard them mention. 12 more girls were recovered over the next month, some who'd been missing for years, others grabbed just days before. The rest stops Brennan named were all monitored, and they caught 3 more drivers, each with their own story about easy money and not asking questions. Each arrest led to more phone numbers, more locations, more girls who made it home. They traced money transfers to accounts in 5 different states, fake businesses that existed only on paper, a whole network that had been operating for at least 3 years according to the federal prosecutors. Haley testified 8 months later, her voice steady in the courtroom as she identified 2 of the men who'd transferred her between vehicles. She'd gone back to school, was seeing a therapist, trying to piece her life back together. Her parents sent me a letter, thanking me for stopping that car, for noticing that taillight. But I keep thinking about all the other Corollas doing exactly 55, all the other drivers with perfect lane position and rehearsed compliance that I didn't stop. Brennan got 15 years as part of a plea deal for his cooperation. The investigation is still ongoing, they tell me. New leads coming in every week. I still patrol Highway 65, still pass mile marker 142 every shift. Now I watch for more than just broken taillights. I watch for cars trying not to exist, for drivers who know their scripts too well, for that particular kind of fear that has nothing to do with getting a ticket. Because now I know what might be in those trunks, who might be counting the minutes in darkness hoping someone notices something wrong enough to take a closer look. Six years into working Colorado State Patrol, I thought I'd developed pretty good instincts about when something was wrong. My 30th birthday was still 2 months out that March morning in 2017, and I'd pulled over enough vehicles on Interstate 70 to know the difference between someone who forgot to renew their tags and someone actively avoiding the DMV for a reason. The silver Dodge Caravan that passed my radar position near the Lyman exit had registration stickers that expired the previous July, faded and peeling at the edges. It was a Wednesday, clear and brutally cold. The kind of high plains weather where the sky stretches forever and there's nowhere to hide. I hit my lights and pulled out behind the van, watching as it drifted slowly onto the shoulder with this hesitant quality that made my gut tighten. Most people pull over quickly when they see the lights, annoyed but compliant. This driver took almost a quarter mile, like they were running through scenarios in their head. When I walked up to the driver's side window, a woman in her mid-40s smiled up at me with too many teeth showing. She had short brown hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and wore a purple fleece jacket with some motivational phrase stitched across the chest in white thread. Before I could say anything, she launched into this explanation about being a foster caregiver, transporting 3 children to Denver for a mandatory meeting with their caseworker. Her hands moved constantly while she talked, touching her necklace, adjusting her glasses, gripping the steering wheel. She told me her name was Denise Calabresi and kept emphasizing how important it was that she get these kids to their appointment on time. Something about her energy felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced this speech. I asked for her license and registration, and while she dug through her glove box, I looked past her into the back of the van. 3 children sat in the middle and rear seats, completely motionless. The oldest was a girl, maybe 9 or 10, with long dark hair hanging over her face as she slumped against the window. 2 younger boys occupied the other seats, their heads tilted forward at angles that looked painful. None of them moved, none of them blinked. They didn't even seem to register that a cop was standing 5 feet away. I asked Denise if the children were all right, keeping my voice casual, but watching her reaction carefully. She barely glanced back at them before answering that they were fine, just tired from the early morning start. She said she'd picked them up at 5 in the morning from a group home in Burlington, that they'd been up late the night before, that kids always fell asleep in the car. Her explanations came rapid fire, each one slightly different from the last, and she kept insisting we needed to get moving or they'd miss their appointment. I told her to sit tight while I ran her information, taking the license and registration back to my patrol car. The paperwork looked legitimate at first glance, a Colorado driver's license issued 2 years prior, vehicle registration in her name. But when I ran her license through dispatch, something felt wrong even before the response came back. The address on file was a P.O. box in Grand Junction, over 200 miles west. The vehicle had been purchased with cash 3 months earlier from a private seller in Pueblo. While I waited for more information, I kept watching the van in my rearview mirror. Denise sat rigid in the driver's seat, both hands on the wheel, even though the engine was off. The children in the back hadn't shifted position at all, not once. The girl's head remained pressed against the window at the exact same angle. One of the boys had his mouth hanging open slightly, and in the 7 or 8 minutes I'd been sitting there, he hadn't closed it, or swallowed, or done any of the tiny unconscious movements that people make. That's when dispatch came back with additional details that changed everything. Denise Calabresi had a prior arrest in Utah from 2015 for child endangerment, charges that were later dropped. More concerning, the vehicle registration showed 5 previous owners in the past 18 months, which is practically unheard of for a 7-year-old minivan. Something about this entire situation had shifted from routine traffic stop to something much darker. I called for backup and approached the van again, this time asking Denise to step out of the vehicle. Her smile finally disappeared. She stepped out slowly, still talking, still trying to control the narrative. She pulled a manila folder from the passenger seat and thrust it toward me, saying it contained all the necessary documentation for the transport: court orders, foster care paperwork, medical records for the children. I flipped through the pages while keeping her in my peripheral vision. The documents looked official enough, complete with agency letterhead and case numbers and signatures from judges. But I'd seen enough forged paperwork in my career to notice the small inconsistencies. The fonts didn't quite match between pages. One signature was clearly photocopied and pasted digitally onto multiple documents. The case numbers followed a format that didn't align with how Colorado actually structured their child services files. When I pointed out these discrepancies, Denise's entire demeanor changed. The friendly foster mom persona evaporated, and she became defensive, angry even, demanding to know why I was harassing someone just trying to help children in need. She said I was going to make these kids late for their appointment, that there would be consequences, that I didn't understand how the system worked. My backup arrived within 10 minutes, another trooper named Vincent Reyes, who I'd worked with dozens of times. While he talked to Denise, keeping her away from the vehicle, I opened the van's sliding door to check on the children. The smell hit me immediately, this stale recycled air mixed with something chemical and sweet that I couldn't place. The girl in the back seat didn't react when I said hello. Her eyes were open but unfocused, staring at nothing. When I gently touched her shoulder, she made this small sound, not quite a word, more like a confused mumble. The two boys were in similar states, awake but not really conscious, their movements sluggish and uncoordinated when they tried to respond to my questions. I asked the girl what her name was, and she took almost 30 seconds to answer. Her words slurred like she was coming out of anesthesia. She said her name was Olivia, but she couldn't tell me her last name or where she was from or why she was in the van. The younger boy, who looked about 5, couldn't answer any questions at all. He just stared at his own hands like he'd never seen them before. I immediately called for an ambulance, telling dispatch we had 3 minors who appeared to be drugged, and requested a supervisor to respond to the scene. Denise started screaming then, actually screaming, about how we were destroying these children's lives, how their real parents were monsters, how she was protecting them from abuse. She kept shouting that we didn't understand, that the system was broken, that good people had to step in when the government failed. Vincent had to physically restrain her and put her in handcuffs because she tried to run back to the van. The whole time she was yelling names and details, saying Olivia's father had been reported for abuse 12 times, that the boy's mother was an addict, that someone had to save them. But when I asked her how she knew these children, how she'd gotten custody of them, where the actual court orders were, she went silent, just stared at me with this disturbing conviction in her eyes, like she genuinely believed she was the hero in this situation. The ambulance arrived and paramedics loaded all 3 kids onto gurneys. Olivia was trying to stay awake but kept drifting off mid-sentence. The smallest boy had vomited on himself at some point and didn't even seem aware of it. The hospital in Lyman stabilized the children and ran blood work that came back showing dangerous levels of diphenhydramine in their systems, the active ingredient in sleep medication. The doctors said all 3 kids had been systematically drugged for at least 3 to 4 days based on the concentrations in their blood. They were severely dehydrated, malnourished, and showed signs of being restrained for extended periods. Olivia had ligature marks around her wrists that were several days old. When she finally became coherent enough to talk, around 6 hours after we'd brought her in, she told investigators that a woman had taken her from a playground near her school in Kansas 5 days earlier. The woman had told her that her mother sent her to pick Olivia up, that there was an emergency. Olivia said she'd been kept in a basement somewhere, that she'd been given medicine that made her sleep, that there were other people there talking about saving children. The 2 boys had similar stories, though the younger one was still too confused to give many details. Both had been taken from different locations in Kansas over the previous week. What came out during the investigation over the following weeks was somehow worse than a single kidnapping. Federal agents from the FBI got involved immediately because the children had been transported across state lines, and what they uncovered was a network of people operating through private social media groups who believed they were rescuing children from abusive situations. These weren't licensed foster agencies or legitimate child protection services. They were ordinary people, dozens of them scattered across multiple states, who'd convinced themselves that the legal system was failing children and that they needed to take matters into their own hands. They called themselves child advocates and freedom networkers, communicating through encrypted messaging apps and closed groups with names like Justice for Innocence and Safe Harbor Collective. Denise had been part of this network for almost 2 years, and her phone records showed hundreds of messages coordinating what they called extractions. They'd share information about families involved in custody disputes, parents who'd been reported to child services, any situation where they decided a child was in danger. Then they'd plan abductions, creating fake documentation, arranging temporary hiding places, and eventually transport routes to move children to other members of the network in different states. The really disturbing part was how they justified everything. Agents found manifestos and shared documents in these groups where members talked about being warriors for children, about how traditional channels had failed, about their moral obligation to act. They'd screenshot news articles about child abuse cases, posts from parents venting about custody battles, anything they could twist into evidence that they needed to intervene. Olivia's father had never been charged with abuse. Those 12 reports Denise mentioned were actually a contentious divorce where Olivia's mother had filed complaints that were investigated and found to be unsubstantiated. But someone in the network had decided that meant the system was covering up abuse, and they'd targeted Olivia for extraction. The two boys had been taken from their grandmother's care while their mother completed a rehabilitation program. Their caseworker had regular contact with them, and they were scheduled to reunify with their mother within a month. But the network had seen a social media post about the mother's previous addiction and decided the children needed to be saved. They'd watched the grandmother's house, learned her routine, and taken the boys from her backyard while she was inside making lunch. Over 40 people were eventually arrested across 7 states as the investigation expanded. They found children being held in basements, spare bedrooms, even a converted garage where a couple in Arizona was keeping 2 siblings they'd taken from a shopping mall parking lot in New Mexico. Some of the children had been missing for months, their families desperate and destroyed, while their captors genuinely believed they were protecting them. The network had a system for creating false identities, forged documents that looked authentic enough to fool most people at a glance. They had members who worked in print shops, others with graphic design skills, people who'd figured out how to replicate official seals and signatures. Denise herself had been holding children at a property outside Grand Junction before transporting them to other network members. Investigators found a room in that house set up like a dormitory with 6 mattresses on the floor, bottles of sleep medication in the cabinet, and restraints hidden in a closet. She'd been moving kids through that location for over a year, and some of the children they recovered couldn't even remember their real names anymore because they'd been told they were someone else for so long. The thing that still gets to me, the part I can't shake even now, is how close Denise came to succeeding. If her registration tags hadn't been expired, if I'd been running radar somewhere else that morning, if I hadn't noticed the way those kids sat so unnaturally still, she would have made it to Denver. She had contacts there ready to take those 3 children and move them further into the network, maybe out of the country eventually. Olivia would have disappeared completely, and her parents would have spent the rest of their lives wondering what happened to their daughter. The 2 boys would have become ghosts. Their grandmother blamed herself until the day she died. All 3 kids had to go through months of therapy, and Olivia still has nightmares according to the victim advocate who stayed in touch with me. Denise Calabresi was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison, and she never showed remorse. At her sentencing, she gave this speech about how history would vindicate her, how she'd done what was necessary, how the real criminals were the people who let children suffer. 47 other network members received sentences ranging from 5 to 25 years. The FBI shut down the online groups, but I know there are probably others out there, different names and different platforms, people who've convinced themselves that their twisted logic justifies stealing children. I think about that every single time I pull someone over now. Every traffic stop, every expired tag, every minor violation could be the thread that unravels something terrible. That silver minivan taught me that evil doesn't always look like what you expect. Sometimes it looks like a middle-aged woman in a purple fleece jacket, with an inspirational quote stitched on the chest, smiling at you through a car window while 3 drugged children sit silent in the back seat. People always ask me why I still drive during the day now. Why I plan my routes to avoid stopping anywhere remote. The answer isn't simple, and honestly, most folks don't want to hear it. But I'll tell you anyway because what happened along Interstate 20 changed everything about how I see the road. April of 2015 marked my 12th year working highway patrol for the Alabama Department of Public Safety. My sergeant's exam was 2 weeks away, and I'd been pulling extra shifts to prove I could handle the responsibility. The stretch of I-20 between the Georgia line and Birmingham was my territory. 160 miles of asphalt I knew better than my own neighborhood. Rest areas were normally the quietest part of my shift, just truckers catching sleep and families letting kids burn off energy. That Tuesday morning in early April, everything looked routine when dispatch sent me to mile marker 165. The rest area sat about 40 miles east of Birmingham, one of those older facilities the state kept meaning to renovate but never got around to funding. Nothing fancy, just bathrooms, vending machines, and a few picnic tables under some pine trees. When I pulled in around 7 in the morning, the sun was already burning off the fog, and I counted maybe 4 vehicles in the lot. A silver Toyota Camry sat alone near the far end, away from the main building. The driver's door hung open. I remember thinking someone probably left it ajar by accident, maybe rushing to the bathroom. But as I got closer, I saw him slumped against the steering wheel, and there was blood on the window. A Glock 19 lay on the passenger seat. My training kicked in immediately, securing the scene, calling for backup and medical even though I could tell he was gone. The man's name was Jeffrey Pruitt, a sales manager from Atlanta heading home after a conference in Mississippi. 46 years old, married, 2 kids in college. The investigation lasted 3 days before they ruled it a suicide. I didn't think much about it after filing my report. Suicides happened on highways more than people realized, usually guys going through divorces or facing bankruptcy who couldn't handle the pressure anymore. The case file went to the county coroner, and I moved on to the next call. But 6 weeks later, on a Wednesday in late May, dispatch sent me to mile marker 142, same highway, different rest area. This one was smaller, just a parking lot with bathrooms and a pet walking area. A white Ford F-150 sat by itself near the tree line. The driver was a woman named Angela Cortez, a nursing supervisor from Louisiana, driving to visit her sister in Atlanta. 51 years old, recently promoted at work, no history of depression according to her family. She'd been shot once in the right temple with a Smith & Wesson revolver that belonged to her late father. The weapon was still in her right hand when the cleaning crew found her that morning. Again, investigators called it suicide, and again, something about it bothered me, but I couldn't articulate what. The third one happened in early July, mile marker 188, a rest area on the other side of Birmingham that technically wasn't even my usual patrol zone. I only heard about it because the trooper who responded, a guy named Calvin I'd gone through the academy with, mentioned it during a shift change. Another apparent suicide, another isolated rest area, another victim with no obvious motive. This time it was a man named Howard Chen, a restaurant owner from Texas driving to a food service convention in Georgia. 63 years old, grandfather of 5, pillars of his community back in Houston. He'd supposedly shot himself with a Ruger that investigators found wiped clean of prints except for his own. Calvin said the scene felt staged to him, too neat, too convenient. But physical evidence supported suicide, and without proof of foul play, the case closed within a week. I started keeping my own notes after that conversation, writing down dates and locations in a notebook I kept in my patrol car. By mid-August, 2 more bodies turned up at rest areas along I-20, both ruled suicides within days of discovery. The pattern became impossible to ignore. All 5 deaths occurred between 6 and 8 in the morning, always at older, less traveled facilities, always single gunshot wounds to the head, always with the victim's own registered firearm. The geographical spread covered nearly 200 miles of interstate, but something connected them beyond coincidence. I brought my concerns to Sergeant Daniels during our weekly briefing, laying out the timeline and locations on a map I'd marked up with red circles. He listened, arms crossed, expression unreadable. When I finished, he pointed out that 5 suicides over 4 months across multiple counties didn't constitute a pattern worth investigating, especially when every scene supported the official conclusion. He told me to focus on my regular duties and stop wasting time on closed cases, but I couldn't let it go. That night, I requested copies of all 5 incident reports through official channels, claiming I needed them for a training presentation on suicide prevention. The reports arrived 3 days later, and I spent an entire weekend going through every detail with a highlighter and notepad. The ballistics information caught my attention first. In 3 of the 5 cases, the forensic reports noted unusual stippling patterns around the entrance wounds, inconsistent with self-inflicted injuries at close range. The powder burn suggested the barrel had been held at a slightly different angle than what you'd expect from someone shooting themselves. It was subtle enough that individual investigators missed it, but when you compared all 5 reports side by side, the similarity became obvious. Then I noticed the timing. Every single death occurred within a 90-minute window, between 6:15 and 7:45 in the morning, when rest areas typically had minimal traffic. Security cameras at these facilities were either broken or positioned to cover only the bathroom entrances, not the parking areas. Whoever was doing this understood rest area layouts and surveillance limitations better than most law enforcement officers would. I started reviewing highway camera footage next, submitting requests through the Department of Transportation database. Most agencies don't realize how much footage gets archived, especially on major interstates where traffic monitoring runs constantly. I focused on the hours preceding each death, looking for vehicles that appeared near multiple scenes. The work took weeks because I could only access the system during my shifts without raising suspicion. In late September, I found what I'd been searching for: a dark blue Dodge Ram pickup, extended cab, no visible plates in most frames, appeared on camera footage within 2 hours of 4 different rest area deaths. The truck always traveled eastbound, always during early morning hours, and always exited the interstate at the ramp just past each facility. I traced its movements backward and discovered it entered the highway from different on-ramps each time, never establishing a predictable pattern. But there was something else, something that made my chest tighten when I spotted it. The truck had a light bar mounted across the roof, the kind volunteer firefighters or security contractors use, perfectly legal to own, but illegal to activate on public roads, unless you're emergency personnel. I made copies of every frame showing that truck, burned them to a disk, and locked it in my personal locker at the station. The next morning, I drove to the Alabama Bureau of Investigation field office in Birmingham and asked to speak with whoever handled serial crime cases. They assigned me to an investigator named Special Agent Fitzgerald, a woman in her early 50s who'd worked organized crime before transferring to major case investigations. I laid everything out for her: the timeline, the ballistics inconsistencies, the truck, the footage, all of it. She listened without interrupting, taking notes in a leather-bound notebook that looked older than I was. When I finished, she asked me one question: did anyone else know about my investigation? I told her no, that my sergeant had dismissed my concerns, and I'd been working alone. Fitzgerald nodded slowly, then made a phone call right there in front of me. 20 minutes later, 2 more agents joined us in the conference room, and suddenly my informal inquiry became an official investigation. The Bureau moved fast once they had the footage and ballistics comparisons. Within 72 hours, they'd identified the truck through partial VIN reconstruction from enhanced camera images and cross-referenced it with vehicle registration databases across 6 states. The owner was a man named Glenn Whitaker, 57 years old, former sheriff's deputy from Mississippi, who'd been terminated in 2013 after multiple excessive force complaints. He'd sued the department for wrongful termination, lost, and basically disappeared from law enforcement circles. Property records showed he owned a small house outside Meridian, but neighbors reported seeing him only sporadically. His bank records revealed he'd been making cash deposits every few weeks, amounts that suggested he was working somewhere but not reporting income. The Bureau also discovered he still had access to decommissioned badges and equipment through a friend who ran a police surplus store. Fitzgerald told me they believed Whitaker was conducting fake traffic stops at rest areas, using his lights and credentials to approach victims who thought they were dealing with legitimate law enforcement. The theory was that he'd target people traveling alone, wait for them to park at isolated rest areas, then approach with his badge and some fabricated violation. Once he had them out of their vehicles or vulnerable inside them, he'd force them to use their own weapons, staging the scenes to look like suicides. The ballistics inconsistencies came from him controlling the gun while making it appear self-inflicted, a technique that required knowledge of forensic investigation procedures. It was methodical, calculated, and absolutely terrifying, because it exploited the one thing most people trust without question on the highway. The Bureau wanted to set up surveillance on Whitaker's property and monitor the interstate for his truck, but Fitzgerald had a different idea. She asked if I'd be willing to work undercover as bait, driving my personal vehicle along I-20 during early morning hours to draw him out. The plan was risky, but federal agents would be tracking me constantly through GPS, and backup units would stay within 3 minutes of my location at all times. I agreed to do it, partly because I wanted this guy caught, and partly because I knew those 5 victims deserved justice their families weren't getting. For 2 weeks in November, I drove my personal Subaru Outback along I-20 during the early morning shift, stopping at different rest areas between the Georgia line and Birmingham. The Bureau had fitted my vehicle with hidden cameras and audio equipment, plus a panic button disguised as my key fob. Every morning felt like walking a tightrope because I had to appear vulnerable enough to attract attention, but alert enough to react if things went wrong. On the 14th day, a Friday morning in mid-November, I pulled into the rest area at mile marker 151 around 6:30. The parking lot was empty except for one semi-truck at the far end, driver probably sleeping in the cab. I parked near the picnic area, killed the engine, and pretended to check my phone. 15 minutes passed, then I saw it in my rearview mirror. That dark blue Dodge Ram rolling slowly into the lot, light bar clearly visible on the roof. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced myself to stay calm, to act natural. The truck parked 2 spaces behind me, angled so its headlights illuminated my vehicle. A man got out wearing what looked like a deputy's uniform, complete with badge and utility belt. He approached my driver's side window with that specific walk law enforcement develops, authoritative but not aggressive. When he knocked on my glass, I rolled it down and tried to look confused rather than terrified. He introduced himself as Deputy Whitaker, said he'd received a report about a vehicle matching mine, involved in a hit and run back at mile marker 165, needed to see my license and registration. His voice was calm, professional, exactly how a real officer would sound. I handed him my documents, buying time for the backup units to close in. He examined them for maybe 30 seconds, then handed them back and asked me to step out of the vehicle. That's when I saw his right hand drift toward his belt, not to his radio or citation book, but to a holster that held a Beretta 9mm. I pressed the panic button. Everything happened in less than 90 seconds. 4 unmarked Bureau vehicles came screaming into the rest area from both directions, blocking every exit. Whitaker realized what was happening immediately, his expression shifting from professional calm to pure rage in an instant. He went for his weapon, but agents were already out of their cars, weapons drawn, shouting commands. He put his hands up slowly, that fake badge glinting in the morning sun. They took him down hard on the pavement, cuffed him, and searched his truck on sight. Inside, they found a collection of decommissioned badges from 3 different agencies, 2 sets of magnetic emergency lights, a police radio scanner, and a laptop containing surveillance photos of at least 15 different rest areas along I-20 and Interstate 59. They also found a notebook with dates, times, and vehicle descriptions, including entries that matched all 5 victims. In the glove compartment was a Taurus pistol that ballistics later matched to gunshot residue found at 2 of the crime scenes, residue that shouldn't have existed if the deaths were truly suicides. Whitaker's trial lasted 6 weeks in federal court, prosecutors charged him with 5 counts of first-degree murder, unlawful impersonation of law enforcement, and a dozen other felonies. The evidence was overwhelming, from the ballistics matches to the surveillance footage to the materials in his truck. His defense tried to argue that he'd been conducting citizen patrols and had nothing to do with the deaths, but the jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before convicting him on all counts. He got 5 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. The families of the victims finally got answers, though I know that knowledge probably didn't ease their pain much. As for me, I made sergeant 6 months later, but I never stopped thinking about those 2 weeks in November, about how close I came to becoming the 6th victim in his notebook. These days, I coordinate rest area safety initiatives for the state, making sure cameras cover parking lots and increasing patrol presence during early morning hours. People still ask why I'm so obsessive about it, why I push for funding nobody else thinks is necessary. I just tell them I've seen what happens when we're not watching carefully enough, when someone exploits the trust people place in a badge and a uniform. That's usually enough to end the conversation, because deep down, nobody really wants to think about the fact that the person pulling you over might not be who they claim to be. "15 years on the force, and I thought I'd seen everything." That's what I kept telling myself during those endless overnight shifts patrolling the stretch of Highway 89 between Flagstaff and the Nevada border. My sergeant used to joke that nothing exciting ever happened on a Wednesday night in November, and for the most part, he was right. I'd spent the better part of 2013 writing speeding tickets and helping stranded motorists with flat tires. My daughter had just turned 6 that fall, and I'd been pulling extra shifts to save up for her birthday trip to Disneyland the following summer. The job had become routine, comfortable even, which is probably why I almost dismissed the alert when it came through on my automated license plate reader around 2 in the morning. The system pinged with that sharp electronic beep that always made my coffee jump in the cup holder. A silver 2007 Ford Taurus had just passed my position, heading westbound. The plate came back registered to a vehicle connected to a missing persons investigation out of Indiana. Not a warrant, not a stolen vehicle report, just a flag in the system asking officers to make contact and report. I'd gotten maybe 3 or 4 of these alerts in my entire career, and they usually turned out to be clerical errors or family members who'd taken off voluntarily, and someone filed a report anyway. Still, protocol was protocol. I flipped on my lights and pulled out onto the highway, watching the Taurus's brake lights flare red in the darkness ahead. The car didn't speed up or try to run. It just drifted smoothly onto the shoulder, gravel crunching under the tires, and came to a complete stop with the turn signal still blinking. That should have been my first hint that something was seriously wrong, because normal people panic a little when they see those lights. This driver had been expecting it. I approached the vehicle with my flashlight, doing the standard scan of the interior through the back window before I got to the driver's side. What I saw made me stop mid-step. The back seat was completely gutted. No upholstery, no fabric, just bare metal framework and springs exposed like the skeleton of some animal. Every window, front and back, had this reflective silver material taped to the inside, the kind of emergency blanket stuff you see in survival kits. It caught my flashlight beam and threw it back at me in fragmented patterns. Through the gaps in the material, I could make out shapes in the back, duffel bags maybe, and something that looked like chains bundled up on the floor. My hand went to my radio instinctively, but I didn't call it in yet. Sometimes people lived out of their cars, and maybe this guy was just some eccentric traveler with weird modifications. That's what I tried to tell myself as I reached the driver's window and tapped on the glass with my knuckles. The window rolled down, and the smell hit me first. Not the usual car odors of fast food or air freshener, but something chemical and sharp, like industrial cleaner mixed with sweat. The driver was a white male, maybe in his early 40s, with thinning brown hair plastered to his forehead. But it was his face that made my pulse pick up. Deep purple bruises spread across his left cheek and temple, fresh enough that the edges were still that ugly yellow-green color. His right eye was bloodshot, the white turned completely red like a blood vessel had burst. More bruises ringed his neck, finger-shaped marks that looked like someone had tried to strangle him. He wore a stained gray hoodie with the sleeves pushed up, revealing more bruising on his forearms, defensive wounds crisscrossing his skin. Despite all this, he smiled at me. Not nervous, not guilty, just tired. "Evening, officer," he said, his voice hoarse and raspy. "I figured you'd pull me over sooner or later." I asked for his license and registration, keeping my voice steady even though every instinct was screaming at me to call for backup right then. He handed them over without hesitation, movements slow and deliberate like he didn't want to spook me. The license read Gregory Allen Brenner, address in Fort Wayne, Indiana, same state as the missing persons flag. I shined my light past him into the passenger seat and saw a clipboard with what looked like printed photographs paper-clipped to forms, the kind of documentation you'd see in official paperwork. "Mr. Brenner," I said, "I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle. Keep your hands where I can see them." He nodded, that same exhausted compliance, and opened his door. When he stood up, I noticed he was limping, favoring his left leg. He positioned himself against the side of the car without me having to tell him, hands flat on the roof like he'd done this before. While I patted him down, I asked about the bruises. He didn't flinch when I touched his ribs, even though I could feel the swelling through his hoodie. "Got into it with a runner 2 days ago in Pennsylvania," he said, matter of fact. Kid was stronger than he looked, 17 years old and built like a linebacker. Had to use pepper spray to get him secured. Runner. That word hung in the air between us. I stepped back and told him to turn around slowly. "What kind of work do you do, Mr. Brenner?" He met my eyes, and there was nothing deceptive in his expression, just bone-deep weariness. "I recover runaway teenagers for their families," he said. "Private contracts, mostly through a service based out of Ohio. Parents hire the company when their kids take off and the police can't help fast enough. I locate them, make contact, and transport them back home. It's legal work, officer. I have all the documentation in the car. Signed parental consent forms, photographs, last known locations, everything." That's when I called for backup. Something about the way he said it, so rehearsed and clinical, made my gut twist. While we waited for my partner to arrive, I asked Brenner about the modifications to his vehicle. He explained each one like he was describing features on a work truck. The stripped back seat made it easier to clean and disinfect between transports. The reflective material on the windows prevented runners from signaling to people outside or breaking the glass to escape. The reinforced trunk, he claimed, was for secure storage of personal belongings so the teenagers couldn't access anything dangerous during transport. "They get violent sometimes," he added, touching the bruise on his face, "especially the ones who've been on the street for months. They don't understand I'm trying to help them get home." My partner, Officer Janet Kurtz, arrived within 10 minutes and immediately radioed for a supervisor when she saw the state of the vehicle. Brenner remained calm throughout, leaning against the hood with his arms crossed, watching us with that tired, patient expression. We searched the car with Brenner's permission, and what we found made the situation exponentially worse. In the trunk, underneath a heavy wool blanket, we discovered a metal toolbox containing zip ties, duct tape, a taser, two-way radios, and a locked leather pouch that Brenner said held medical sedatives. "For extreme cases," he explained when Kurtz held up the pouch, "when they're a danger to themselves or others during transport. I have a standing prescription from a doctor who works with the company." The clipboard from the front seat contained files on 6 different teenagers, each with a professional photograph, physical descriptions, known associates, and locations where they'd been spotted. 3 of the files had red stamps across them reading, "Recovered." The other 3 were still active. One of them, a 16-year-old girl named Cassidy from South Bend, had a note scrawled in the margin. "Last seen Sunday near truck stop, Reno area. Confirmed sighting, proceed with caution, has knife." The photograph showed a blonde teenager with a nose piercing and scared eyes. My supervisor, Sergeant Dalton, arrived with 2 more units and immediately separated Brenner from us to conduct his own interview. While that happened, Kurtz and I started making calls. The company Brenner mentioned, Homeward Solutions LLC, existed and had a website advertising family reunification services. But when we contacted the Ohio Attorney General's office, things started unraveling fast. They had no record of any legitimate bail enforcement or recovery agency operating under that name. The business license had been registered just 8 months prior using a P.O. box address. When we ran Brenner's background, we found 2 prior arrests in Illinois for unlawful restraint that had been pleaded down to misdemeanors. He'd also been fired from a bail bonds company in 2009 for using excessive force on a skip. None of this matched his story of being a professional family service contractor. The parental consent forms in his files looked official enough, but the signatures were all variations of the same handwriting style, and none of the phone numbers listed for the parents connected to working lines. What really broke the case open was the missing persons database. When we cross-referenced the names and photos from Brenner's files, 4 of the 6 teenagers were listed as endangered runaways with active investigations. But here's the thing that still makes my skin prickle when I think about it. None of the families in those reports had ever hired anyone to find their kids. In fact, 2 of the families specifically told investigators they'd been contacted by someone claiming to have information about their children's whereabouts in exchange for payment. One mother in Wisconsin had wired $3,000 to Homeward Solutions before losing contact with them entirely. The girl in that file, 14-year-old Bethany, had been missing for 7 weeks when we pulled Brenner over. We found her jacket in his trunk, along with a prepaid cell phone containing text messages discussing pickup locations and delivery fees. The messages referenced other drivers, other vehicles, and what they called collection zones in truck stops and bus stations across 5 different states. Brenner was arrested on the spot and charged with kidnapping, extortion, and interstate transportation of minors. He didn't resist, didn't lawyer up immediately, just kept insisting he was doing honest work for desperate families. During processing, he gave up names of 3 other drivers working the same circuit, along with the identity of the man running the operation, a former private investigator named Carl Novak, who'd been operating out of a storage unit in Dayton. The FBI got involved within hours because of the multi-state nature of the crimes. What they uncovered was worse than any of us anticipated. Novak had been running this scheme for at least 2 years, targeting vulnerable runaways who'd already been reported missing. His drivers would locate these kids at shelters, street corners, anywhere they congregated, then either lure them with promises of help or simply grab them when the opportunity presented itself. Some were held in the modified vehicles for days while Novak contacted families pretending to be a legitimate recovery service. If families paid, the kids would sometimes actually be returned, traumatized, but alive. If families couldn't pay or refused, the teenagers would be abandoned in random locations far from where they'd been taken, or worse, sold to other criminal networks Novak had connections with. The case took 8 months to fully investigate and prosecute. They recovered 11 teenagers in total, including Cassidy, who was found at a motel outside Reno 3 days after we arrested Brenner. She'd been locked in his trunk for 6 hours during a transport before he stopped for the night and moved her to a room he'd paid for in cash. Bethany was found safe with relatives in Florida, placed there by another one of Novak's drivers who apparently had some remaining conscience, and dropped her somewhere she'd be cared for instead of following orders. Brenner got 18 years federal prison. Novak got 35. The other drivers received sentences ranging from 8 to 22 years depending on their level of involvement. I testified at 3 separate trials, and every time I had to look at those files again, at those scared faces in the photographs, I felt sick. The thing that stays with me most isn't even the violence or the cruelty of it all. It's how mundane Brenner made it sound that night on the highway. How he genuinely seemed to believe he was providing a service. That's what evil looks like sometimes. Not some monster in the shadows, Just an exhausted man in a stained hoodie who's convinced himself that what he's doing is justified. I still patrol that same stretch of highway, but I don't dismiss those automated alerts anymore, no matter how routine they seem. I'd been doing highway maintenance work for nearly 8 years, mostly night shifts when that case hit the news. Back then, I was covering long overnight drives between small towns, usually alone, checking cameras and road barriers. That stretch of road had always been quiet. Long flat miles, distant lights from gas stations, and the occasional convoy of trucks humming in the dark. My life revolved around coffee from vending machines, static from the radio, and the comfort of routine. It was the kind of monotony that made you start noticing every detail, how the fog hung low over the fields, how the asphalt changed tone under different kinds of headlights. The night it happened, I wasn't far. About 10 minutes before the report came in, I was parked near an emergency pull-off, logging some barrier replacements on my tablet. Out of habit, I kept the radio on the local patrol frequency. When dispatch called in a sedan crash near one of the overpasses, the tone in their voice made me sit up. They mentioned the driver was unresponsive, and something about impact from above. My first thought was that maybe a trucker had dropped cargo, but that explanation didn't last long once I heard they'd closed the entire span of the bridge. I drove out there before they even asked for road crew assistance. The scene looked wrong in that cold fluorescent glare. Cones scattered, paramedics crouched by a car that had veered halfway into the grass. The windshield was shattered inward, glass sparkling like frost under the lights. A patrol officer I knew, Carter, waved me back when I got too close. He just shook his head when I asked if the driver was okay. I remember noticing the dent on the hood. It wasn't from a collision with another car. It was small and deep, as if someone had dropped a cinder block from above. Later that morning, when the footage started circulating between departments, curiosity got the better of me. The dash cam from that sedan showed exactly what they said: a dark shape falling from the bridge just before the impact. No one visible on the structure. Nothing showing where it came from. But the next day, another call came in. Different highway, same pattern. And by the third, it wasn't a coincidence anymore. Someone, or several someones, was targeting random cars for some kind of twisted online stunt. When the task force got involved, I was asked to assist with inspecting the bridges along my route. I'd seen a lot of strange things on those night shifts. Accidents, wildlife, even the occasional person wandering along the shoulder. But this felt different. The officers were tense, quiet, and always looking up. Each bridge we checked carried that same uneasy silence, like the air itself remembered what had happened there. On one overpass, I found a small pile of gravel stacked neatly near the edge, like someone had been preparing ammunition. It was the kind of detail you'd overlook if you weren't paying attention. Word spread fast in nearby towns. People started avoiding the highway after dark, and the local news ran every segment they could. Some treated it like gossip, others like a ghost story. Then came the videos. Short clips surfacing online of masked kids throwing debris and laughing as headlights swerved below. Most were fake or re-uploaded pranks, but a few matched the timing and locations of the real incidents. That's when it stopped feeling like an isolated crime, and more like something coordinated, maybe even celebrated. One night, I was called out again. Another report near a bridge about 15 miles from the first crash. By the time I arrived, the suspect was already in custody. He couldn't have been more than 17. What I'll never forget is the look on the officer's face standing next to him. Carter, the same guy from the first scene. He kept his eyes on the ground as the kid was loaded into the patrol car. Only later did I learn that boy was his son. It explained the silence that hung over the investigation afterward, the way everyone avoided mentioning names. A week later, when the reports were filed, the pattern became impossible to ignore. The attacks had been planned over a private group chat, a challenge that promised viral fame to whoever caused the biggest wreck. Every clip, every timestamp, every shared laugh, it was all there. Carter went on leave not long after, and that stretch of highway was fitted with new cameras and metal nets under the bridges. Still, even now, when I drive those roads at night, I catch myself scanning the overpasses out of habit. Sometimes I swear I see movement up there, just a flicker, like someone leaning over the railing, waiting. A few months passed, and the highway slowly returned to normal traffic. The memorial cross for the first victim stayed on the shoulder, surrounded by faded flowers and empty bottles left by strangers. I'd drive past it during my shifts, always slowing down a little. It became a quiet reminder of how quickly something senseless could change everything. The investigation wrapped up without much media coverage after that. Most people just moved on. But for those of us who worked those nights, the silence never really went away. One evening, during a storm, I had to inspect one of the bridges we'd reinforced. Rain was hammering so hard it blurred the guardrails into streaks of gray. When I stepped out of the truck, I saw something sitting near the edge. A chunk of concrete about the size of a football, resting perfectly in the center of the walkway. It looked fresh, like it had been placed there minutes earlier. There were no footprints, no tire marks on the shoulder. Just the sound of rain and the echo of water dripping through the cracks. I radioed it in, and they sent a unit to sweep the area. Nothing came of it, of course. The footage showed no one approaching the bridge for hours before I got there. Still, for weeks afterward, the spotlights under that overpass stayed on every night, cutting through the dark like warning eyes. Drivers probably thought it was just another safety measure. I knew better. It was there because some part of us couldn't trust that it was truly over. I left that job a year later and took a position closer to home. But I still drive those same roads sometimes out of habit, watching the lights of the bridges fade in the distance. Every now and then, I think about Carter's kid and the twisted chain of dares that started it all. The internet forgot, like it always does, but I can't. Whenever a gust of wind rattles my windshield, I glance up at the overpasses without even realizing it. You'd think after all this time I'd stop expecting to see someone up there, but I never do. Not clearly, anyway. When I joined the patrol, I used to love the early morning shifts, the kind of quiet stretches where the fog hung low, and the only sounds were my own tires rolling over wet asphalt. That night, I was halfway through my shift when dispatch came through with a call that didn't sound right. A woman's voice, shaky and muffled, claiming she was on the shoulder and that someone had tried to take her. The connection kept cutting out, just fragments of sentences and the soft sound of her breathing, like she was trying not to be heard. The dispatcher flagged it as high priority because the area had poor reception and no backup nearby. I was the closest unit, about 15 minutes out, and the kind of silence that followed the last transmission made the hair on my arms rise. I remember driving through the fog and feeling how the world seemed smaller, swallowed up by that pale gray. Visibility was maybe 30 feet at best. My cruiser headlights barely cut through, turning the mist into a glowing wall ahead of me. I slowed near the marker where the call had pinged, rolling the window down to listen. Nothing but the hum of the engine and the faraway hiss of traffic. Then faintly, movement. A shape walking along the shoulder, drenched, shivering, her hands held close to her chest like she was trying to warm herself. I pulled over, hit the lights, and stepped out, calling to her. She looked up at me, face pale, strands of wet hair plastered to her forehead. Her voice came out in bursts, between shallow breaths. She said she'd been kidnapped, managed to get away when her abductor pulled off onto a side road, and that his vehicle was still there. She kept pointing toward the tree line where the fog thickened like smoke. I noted her condition, soaked, trembling, barefoot, wearing a torn dress that clung to her. No ID, no bag. My training kicked in. Keep distance, stay alert, get details. I radioed dispatch, but all I got was static, a scratchy half-response that dissolved into noise. She urged me to follow her, said the man was probably still there, maybe hurt. The urgency in her eyes made me hesitate. Something about her kept shifting, not physically, but in the way she looked at me. 1 second desperate, the next oddly calm. I tried my radio again, switched channels, and caught fragments of something else. A voice repeating phrases almost identical to what she'd said a minute ago. "Please help me. He's still there." The same tone, the same pauses, like a recording playing just out of sync. My stomach tightened. I drew a breath, glanced back at the highway, still empty, and decided to follow her a few steps off the shoulder, my hand resting on my flashlight. The turnoff she led me to was barely visible through the fog, just a narrow path of gravel curving between overgrown brush. My boots sank into the soft mud as I stepped past the guardrail. The air smelled metallic, like rain and old engine oil. She kept glancing over her shoulder, whispering that the car was right there, but every time I looked where she pointed, there was nothing but mist. Then something flickered in my peripheral vision. A red glint, maybe a taillight gone as quickly as it appeared. I angled my flashlight, catching the outline of a scarf tangled on a low branch. It looked new but damp, like someone had deliberately set it there. I called out, asking for her name, trying to ground the situation, but she didn't answer. When I turned around, she was standing farther away than before, near the bend where the gravel disappeared into darkness. The fog swallowed her figure up to the waist, her outline blurred like a smudge on glass. I stepped closer, but before I could say anything, my radio cracked to life. A burst of feedback, then a familiar voice. Mine. My own voice, repeating the words I'd said minutes earlier when I'd first arrived. The same tone, the same background noise. It didn't make sense. I froze in place, listening as the static warped back into silence. I switched frequencies, trying to reach dispatch again, and got a different transmission. Faint crying, distant and repetitive, like someone replaying a short clip on a loop. It wasn't coming from my radio anymore. It was coming from somewhere nearby. A muffled echo drifting through the fog. My flashlight caught a glimmer of something small on the ground. A child's sneaker, perfectly clean, as if it had never touched mud. The placement was too deliberate. It felt staged, like pieces being laid out to guide me deeper in. I scanned the area, scanning the fog for movement, and realized how quiet it had become. No wind, no insects, no highway noise. Just me. Instinct told me to pull back, regroup, call for backup from a safer distance. But then my phone buzzed with a map notification, the shared location from the emergency call. I glanced at it, and the pin was moving, jumping erratically between 2 points. One near my cruiser, the other farther down the turnoff. It kept switching back and forth, as if someone wanted me to chase it. I turned toward the direction of the second point, and that's when I saw it. A faint silhouette crouched behind a cluster of bushes, not moving, not running, just waiting, watching me through the fog. I kept the beam steady, scanning the shape ahead. The crouched figure didn't move, not even when I called out. My thumb hovered near the safety clip on my holster, every nerve on alert. I took one cautious step forward. That was when a faint metallic tap echoed behind me. I turned the flashlight toward the sound, catching the edge of something reflective near my cruiser's lights in the distance. The instant I looked back, the silhouette was gone. I couldn't see where it went, but the fog shifted slightly, like air displaced by movement. My pulse thudded in my ears, and I realized I'd lost sight of the woman entirely. My training told me to return to the vehicle, but curiosity and protocol fought inside me. What if someone really was hurt out there? I moved a few steps deeper down the turnoff. A dim glow appeared through the mist, headlights angled downward, half buried in brush. The car was there after all. The driver's door was open, the interior lights flickering weakly. I announced myself, cleared the immediate area, then leaned in to look. The seats were empty, but the floor was littered with small objects, coins, a hair tie, an empty water bottle, all too clean, too carefully scattered. A faint smell of gasoline hung in the air. Then from my radio again came a voice I recognized, my dispatcher, but it was wrong. The timing of her speech was off, each word clipped and mechanical. Unit 3-1, confirm status. I answered, but the line crackled and her voice continued repeating the same sentence, even as I spoke. Layered under it was another faint sound. Whispers, too low to distinguish, moving in and out of the static. It felt like multiple transmissions stitched together. My instincts screamed that I was being baited, pulled deeper into something orchestrated. I backed away from the car, scanning the tree line again. As I reached for my flashlight belt, my boot hit something. A folded paper map, half buried in the mud. It wasn't weathered like you'd expect. When I picked it up, I saw a red circle drawn around the very area I was standing in. The ink hadn't run from the rain. My location, marked ahead of time. Every small detail, the scarf, the sneaker, even the scattered items in the car, started connecting in my head. This wasn't random. Someone had planned this down to the minute. The fog seemed heavier now, pressing close, and somewhere out there, just past where I could see, a low engine turned over. The sound of that engine cut straight through the fog, a low rumble that idled for a moment, then stopped. I turned my light in the direction it came from, but there was nothing but a wall of mist. My cruiser's lights were barely visible through the haze behind me. I decided to move back toward the highway, keeping my flashlight low and my hand close to my sidearm. Each step on the gravel felt loud, like I was announcing my location. Halfway back, I caught another flicker of movement, someone darting between the trees to my left, too fast to track. I shouted a warning, identified myself as law enforcement, but the woods answered with silence. When I finally reached the edge of the shoulder, I saw a second pair of headlights through the fog. Backup. Relief hit me so hard I almost laughed, until I noticed they were angled wrong. Not approaching from the interstate, but already parked there facing mine. A black SUV, engine running, no markings. Its driver's door was ajar, interior dark. I called out again, voice firm, but got no response. The wind shifted then and I could smell something, the same gasoline scent, stronger this time. That's when the dispatcher's voice returned, crystal clear, saying my unit number, but this time she used my first name. Only she didn't know my first name. I cut the radio immediately, stepped behind my cruiser for cover and drew my weapon. The SUV headlights dimmed slightly, like someone had just stepped in front of them. For a few seconds, all I could hear was the ticking of my engine cooling down. Then came the faint scrape of shoes on asphalt. One figure, maybe two, walking slowly along the shoulder toward me. I shouted commands. No reply. My light caught only fragments, the glint of wet fabric, a hand partially raised, a shadow moving just out of focus. And then the sound stopped. The SUV engine cut. Silence again, heavy enough that I could hear my heartbeat. Later, investigators said I was lucky. Another unit found me about 20 minutes after my last transmission, standing by my cruiser, weapon drawn, still sweeping the fog. The SUV was gone. So was the woman. The only evidence left were footprints, several sets, circling my patrol car before vanishing into the brush. The victim's phone, the one used to make the call, was later found 2 counties away, wiped clean except for one saved audio clip. My own voice distorted and replaying the same few words I'd spoken when I first arrived. Whoever they were, they knew exactly how to lure an officer alone into the dark.